Mascots. A person or thing that is supposed to bring good luck. The underdogs of sports. These guys bring the fun and entertainment to sports while also representing the brand they associate with. I should know, because I am a mascot. Mascots have been around longer than you think they have, as they've been around since the late 1800s, in the form of live animals and cartoony drawings/logos. In the 1970s, mascots quickly took off with the popularity of the San Diego Chicken and Philly Fanatic. But I'm not talking about any of those mascots today. Today we are heading to the state of Alabama. More specifically, we are heading to the University of Alabama, located in Tuscaloosa, where a certain mammoth of a mascot lives, and his name is Big Al the Elephant. This larger-than-life elephant has been around Alabama for over 40 years, delighting and entertaining sports fans everywhere and becoming one of the most beloved mascots in all of sports. In this video, we will be going over the evolution of Big Al, from the highs to the lows, from the past to the present, as well as answering the age-old question, why is the Crimson Tide mascot an elephant? This is the history of Big Al, the University of Alabama's beloved mascot. So before we talk about this popular pachyderm, I want to quickly go over the history of the University of Alabama, as well as where the elephant nickname came from. The University of Alabama was founded on December 18, 1820, but did not open until 1831, as the University of the State of Alabama. It is located in the city of Tuscaloosa, not Montgomery, even though it's the state capital, but that's pretty normal for colleges named after states. The campus is a whopping 1.143 acres and currently has 38,320 students enrolled as of September 2021. As for the elephant being chosen as the mascot, it's actually quite an interesting story, but one that will have to wait, because long before Big Al was stomping around campus, a few other animals called themselves the Alabama mascot. So we all know that today, Alabama's mascot is an elephant. However, going back over 100 years, that wasn't always the case. Several other animals were at one point the school's mascot, so this chapter is going to pay tribute to all of them. The first known Alabama mascot was around 1894, 2 years after Alabama established a football team. There was a stray dog that some Alabama players found wandering the streets. They adopted it and made it the mascot for their upcoming game against Swanee, which they won 24-4. There's little to no information on this mascot other than what I just talked about. I don't even know what dog breed the stray was. I'm also not sure if it wore any clothing, kinda like Uga from the University of Georgia does. I do know that Alabama kept using a dog as their mascot for a few decades, with several live dogs portraying the mascot. The last known dog mascot was in 1921, when Pat, an English bulldog and mascot of the university, passed away. I'm assuming after Pat's passing they stopped using dogs as the mascot, or maybe not. But I do know that they phased dogs out by the early 30s, since that's when a different four-legged live animal began to be used. In 1931, a new live animal began being used as the Alabama mascot, that being a donkey. In other words, a little burro. This little guy was given to the university by former Alabama alumni. He was given the name Thomas Heflin, as a nod to Democrat Heflin, who at the time served in the U.S. Senate. And also, donkeys are a Democrat symbol. Kind of funny since Republicans used an elephant as a symbol, and Alabama would later use an elephant as the mascot, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Around the same time, the Arizona Daily Star referred to the donkey mascot by a different name, Poison. Why this name? Well, they mentioned that having a donkey present would probably cause some weird things to happen, more specifically with other schools' live mascots. Since Alabama was getting ready to play Washington State in the Rose Bowl, they talked about how the donkey could arouse the Washington State mascot Butch the Cougar, since he would probably try to eat the donkey. although Alabama got the last laugh as they won the game 24-0. The donkey continued to serve as the mascot all throughout the 30s. I'm not sure if more than one was used, or if it was the same one for all those years. I mean, a donkey can live for almost 30 years. However, at the 1938 Rose Bowl, there was no donkey present. Instead, Alabama Governor Bibb Graves hired actress Dixie Dunbar to play the quote-unquote California mascot. What the heck does that mean? Well, whatever that means, Alabama lost the game 13-0. But now we must go back to 1930, shortly before a donkey was made the mascot. A significant event that relates to this video occurred. Okay guys, get ready, because I'm about to finally give an answer to the age-old question regarding the University of Alabama. Why is their mascot an elephant? The elephant nickname was first mentioned at a 1930 football game between Alabama and Mississippi. When the Alabama varsity football team came charging out of the field, a fan yelled the now famous line, "Hold your horses! The elephants are coming!" I'm assuming because the sounds of Alabama's players running sounded like a herd of elephants. After this, several sports writers, most notably Everett Strupper, began to refer to the Alabama football team as the Elephants, sometimes the Red Elephants. Oh yeah, did I mention Alabama went 10-0 that year? The school even started to adopt the elephant as their unofficial mascot and call themselves the Red Elephants. Now, while everyone was pretty welcoming to the elephant name, not everyone liked it. Chief among those elephant haters was football head coach Frank Thomas. He was very much against the idea of an elephant as the Alabama mascot, or even any mascot for that matter, but he especially disliked the elephant name. This was because to him, elephants were big, slow, clumsy animals, and that was not the image of his players he wanted to portray. I mean, clearly this guy hadn't been to Africa. Despite Thomas's disapproval, the student body wanted the elephant as the mascot, and that's exactly what they got. Well, not yet. They would have to wait about a decade. Going into the 1940s, the university was still using the elephant as their unofficial mascot. However, it was only used for marketing as well as on a few logos. So Alabama decided to go big. And when I say that, I really mean go big. They purchased a live elephant. Say hello to the first actual elephant mascot for the university. Its name is Alamite. The animal was kept on the university's campus and was primarily used for different events held on and off campus that related to football. For example, Alamite led the homecoming parade every year while also carrying the homecoming queen, who would ride on Alamite's back and into the stadium. Alamite would also stick around for football games, entertaining people on the sidelines. The elephant was almost always seen at these events wearing a large red cloth draped over its back with a white letter A on both sides. As the 1950s rolled around, it was becoming very apparent that keeping a 10,000-pound live elephant on the university campus would be way too expensive. And so they gave up keeping an elephant on campus and instead they chose to rent elephants. While this would be a cheaper option, it would not be easy, as you can't just go to a store and rent an elephant, and the internet didn't exist back then. So instead, the university would get in contact with traveling circuses that were either close to or passing through Alabama, and try to negotiate a deal to borrow their elephants for homecoming. So starting in the 1950s, all the elephants used by the university were circus elephants. Also starting in the 50s, Alabama started to use the elephant as their primary logo. While the Alabama live elephants were beloved by many, there were some people that didn't like them. Mostly the coaches, who were the same ones who were opposed to the elephant name. Other universities also made fun of Alabama for having an elephant mascot, like in 1954 when Alabama brought their elephant to a homecoming game in Miami, where the University of Miami started making jokes about it, mostly jokes referring to the pink elephants from Dumbo. I even heard of opposing fans throwing things at the elephant, but I couldn't confirm anything like that happening. In 1957, Alabama alumni had brought up the idea of having one elephant the school could use, instead of the university renting different elephants from circuses. But this time it would be a baby elephant, they would give it the name Mem, and it would live at the Birmingham Zoo. After a few years, in 1959, the alumni got their wish granted, and the campus spirit group, the Jasons, bought a 4-foot-tall, 700-pound, 4-year-old elephant straight from the jungle, at the price of $3,500, or about $30,000 today when adjusted for inflation. It was given the name Mem, and unfortunately I'm not sure how long Mem served as the mascot, though it couldn't have been that long. I'm also not sure if Mem lived in the Birmingham Zoo. Speaking of the zoo, around the same time Alabama brought another elephant that actually did live at the Birmingham Zoo to the yearly tradition football game known as the Iron Bowl against the Auburn Tigers, who also had a live mascot from the zoo as their mascot. Around the same time Mem the live elephant debut, there were talks going on that a costumed elephant mascot was created and purchased by the university, to be worn by a cheerleader named Eddie Pettyjohn, although there's no evidence that one ever showed up around that time. But there was one that showed up a few years later, and well, it wasn't too good.
Let's go to 1960. The big play comes off Tommy Brooker's foot. 25-yard second quarter field goal. And then a tenacious Tide defense took things in their own hands and beat 8th-ranked Auburn 3-0.
Sometime in the early 1960s, a group of students got together to create a costumed elephant mascot that could be used for things a live elephant couldn't. So what did they come up with? Well, this. Oh God, that is horrifying. I know this was a first attempt at a costumed elephant, but they could have done a little bit better than this. Although I guess he does have a little bit of charm, even if he scared so many children and adults. Let's go over the costume piece by piece, starting with the head, and don't worry, I'll try not to creep you out as much. The head itself is made out of fiberglass, since that was the norm for most mascots at the time. It was molded and shaped into an elephant head and painted red. It was also very heavy. It doesn't have any eyes, they're just black holes, and it was apparently very hard to see out of. And he had his mouth open. His trunk is positioned to be up, and he has 2 small white tusks. Finally, he has giant ears, so giant in fact it's almost at arm length. The body is just a red sweatsuit with a large white A on the front. He didn't have gloves on, so it looked out of place, and he wore normal shoes. And lastly, his tail, which was just a piece of white rope. This first version of the costumed elephant mascot was portrayed by a student named Melford Epsy Jr. And I have to admit, despite how creepy and unsettling the elephant is, Epsy gave it all he had when playing the mascot. Now, as you could imagine, reactions to this costumed elephant were extremely negative, as even back then people saw him as scary and wanted nothing to do with him. The most infamous person to hate this elephant was the new head coach of the football team, Paul Bryant, known by many as Bear Bryant. Even though he allowed Epsy to wear the elephant costume, he made it very clear that he wanted nothing to do with it. He was quoted as saying, "Don't let that big rat get anywhere near me." I should also point out that similar to Frank Thomas, Bear Bryant was also against Alabama having an elephant mascot. So with all that information, Epsy had to entertain and cheer on his team while also getting heckled by fans, having to avoid Coach Bryant, and not to mention watching out for the live elephants, since they were still using circus elephants at this time. Speaking of live animals, this elephant mascot was almost immediately considered a punching bag for other schools, and their live mascots could definitely agree. as multiple incidents occurred with this elephant and other schools' mascots throughout the years. Just to name a few, he was peed on by the Tennessee Volunteers' hound dog, he scared off Mississippi State's bulldog, and get this, he had part of his costume ripped off by the University of Houston's live cougar. Ouch! One notable incident occurred when Epsy, dressed as the elephant, got into a fight with the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets mascot. The fight got so bad it ended up sprawling out onto the field. So after this incident and the overall hatred towards this elephant mascot, in the mid-60s this fiberglass elephant was discontinued and retired, never to be seen again. After the fiasco that was the fiberglass elephant mascot, Alabama never tried another costume mascot again. Instead, they chose to keep using live elephants, and most people began to forget about the costume mascot. However, while it would take another decade to bring back the elephant costume, there were actually a few attempts at another costumed mascot in the early to mid-70s. Sometime around 1971, another costumed mascot was being used by Alabama, but this time it wasn't an elephant, nor was it as scary as the previous costume. Instead, it was a polar bear. Now, why would Alabama have a costumed bear mascot on the sidelines instead of an elephant? Well, I'm guessing it was because it was a nod to Bear Bryant himself. I mean, he did say he didn't want Bama's mascot to be an elephant. The bear costume itself is nothing special, as it's just a big white furry bear head with a red crimson jumpsuit. But now I wonder, where did this bear come from? Who made the costume? Why was it used instead of an elephant? Well, for many years it was a mystery. No one knew where this bear came from. It wasn't until about 40 years later, in the 2010s, that the mystery was solved. It took so long because most people forgot all about the bear. So it turns out that the head of this bear mascot is actually the same exact head that was used on the Icy Bear mascot suit. That's right, this guy you see on icy machines was once the Bama mascot. So how did they get this bear head? Well, unfortunately that part is still a mystery, but it's likely the head was stolen by some students, and no one came to retrieve it. But yeah, very strange. It seems that the bear was only used during major Alabama football events such as the Iron Bowl and the 1972 Sugar Bowl. I'm not sure how long the bear costume was used for, but it had to have been retired in 1972, since there's no other photos of it after that. I do know that it was gone by 1975 since something else took its place, and you may have seen this one, or not. In 1975, Alabama once again returned to the Sugar Bowl to play against Penn State, but this time they brought along a familiar face. They brought a new elephant mascot costume. This elephant was only ever used at the 1975 Sugar Bowl. I'm not sure why, but maybe it was because a lot of people disliked it. Now sure, it was an improvement over the last elephant mascot suit, but it was still far from good. The costume didn't really look anything like an elephant at all. It honestly looks like a dog, probably because of its ears. The trunk is really the only thing that makes me think of an elephant. Although, this mascot did start the tradition of the eye black under the eyes, which is still seen on Big Al today. He doesn't have any hands, so his arms just kinda look like pool noodles, or the arms on those inflatable things I don't know the name of. He also doesn't have any feet, they just put toenails on the bottom of the suit, and you can clearly see the shoes of the performer. So yeah, I can see why he was only used for that one game, although he may have made a difference since Alabama won that game. But even if this mascot was short-lived, Bama fans wouldn't have to wait long for another elephant mascot costume. And let's just say that this one stuck around. Sometime in 1979, a group of students got together to discuss the idea of bringing back another costumed elephant mascot, since they were trying to think of something different for homecoming. Some students were on board with the idea, but others were not. But eventually everybody agreed on the idea. But now it was time to bring up the idea to Bear Bryant. Now here's the thing. While Bear Bryant was against the elephant mascot, he very much respected and cared about students' opinions. So when a group of students went to his office to talk about the elephant, he said no. He said Alabama doesn't have a mascot, and if they did, it would have to be fierce, athletic, and fast, which is the complete opposite of an elephant. Then one student politely asked, "Sir, if that's true, why are there red elephants on our tickets, and why do you have an elephant lamp on your desk?" After being completely outsmarted, Bryant laughed and said, "Well, you're right. We've probably already embraced the elephant mascot." And so on that fateful day in 1979, the University of Alabama officially adopted the elephant as their mascot. Now that the elephant was the official mascot, it's time for the hard part, finding an elephant costume that isn't terrifying or looks like a dog. I should also point out that live elephants were still being used at this time. Although not as much as before, the Bama Blast event was created in 1979, and one of the activities were the live elephants. They were kept in an enclosure on the quad and gave rides to children during homecoming festivities. They were also used for a few pre-game celebrations. Getting back on topic, the university was having trouble with finding an elephant mascot suit, until finally they found the right resources. After trying a few things, the elephant mascot was once again brought up to Bear Bryant, who then got in touch with the university's administrator, Melford Epsy Jr. And yes, this is the same Melford Epsy that played the creepy fiberglass elephant in the 60s. He helped the students with designing, and eventually a student named Walt Tart got in contact with a certain mascot company to create their elephant mascot. Which company, you may ask? Well, it was none other than the Walt Disney Company. I bet you didn't expect that. Yeah, so back then several colleges actually got Disney to design their mascot costumes, and the Alabama elephant was no different. Although I should admit that Disney themselves didn't design the costume, but instead it was a costume designer named Brooks Van Horn. But his company was technically part of Disney, since he helped design several of Disney's costumes. But still, the elephant had Disney origins. The university also gave specific instructions to the designers on the creation of the elephant mascot. Not too cartoony, but not too ferocious. After several weeks of work, and with Bear Bryant helping pay for the suit, the first official elephant mascot costume was born. Except for one thing. He didn't have a name, so the school had to figure out a name before his big debut. The university held a contest for students to come up with a name for the elephant mascot. Around the same time, there was a popular DJ that would DJ many parties and events held on campus, including ones held by the football team. This DJ's name was Al Brown, and immediately there was a campaign started to name the mascot after him. And it succeeded. The elephant's name was now officially Big Al. With a new costume and a new name, the University of Alabama mascot was ready to make his grand debut on the field. Except Bear Bryant didn't want him on the field, so that was out of the question. Now, it's a common misconception that Big Al made his first appearance at the 1979 Sugar Bowl, where Alabama played Penn State. However, this is simply not true, as that Sugar Bowl was held in January, while the costume wasn't created until the fall of 1979, so there's no way he could have appeared. In actuality, Big Al made his first official appearance at the 1980 Sugar Bowl, where Alabama played Arkansas. So despite what some websites and even the university themselves will tell you, it's not true. But anyway, the first person to ever wear the elephant costume was a student named Hugh Dye, who wanted to be a cheerleader, but ended up hurting his knee and gave up on that, but convinced by several friends and officials to try out for the mascot, he ended up getting the role. Hugh also helped unveil Big Al, but it was kind of by accident, as he was out of costume and actually preparing the costume for the Sugar Bowl. Hugh picked up the costume at the Birmingham airport. It was packed in a huge crate that was about 8 to 9 feet tall, and of course it did not fit in his car. So he, along with several airport staff, helped break the crate and put the costume in his car. He then headed to New Orleans, but the whole time he was driving, people kept giving him strange looks. He didn't know why until he noticed the mascot's head was peering out the back of the car's window. Eventually, when he got to New Orleans, he tried on the costume, and almost immediately after he came out of the bathroom with the suit on, he was surrounded by kids. Big Al had arrived. On the day of the game, everyone was getting ready for Big Al's big official debut. The plan was that Hugh would get into the suit and then get into a large refrigerator box. He would then be rolled out onto the field, and just before kickoff, he would emerge from the box. And just like magic, everything went to plan as Big Al busted out of that box and introduced himself to all the fans. Alabama finally had not just a mascot, but a winner. Wow, so it only took 7 chapters, but we are finally going to start talking about the mascot whose name is in the title. I'm first going to talk about the costume itself before I get into any more big stories. Starting with the head, yeah, it's kinda creepy. I know everyone says the old fiberglass head was creepy, but at least that looked like an elephant. This one, while yes, you can still tell it's an elephant, almost looks a lot more like an alien. I'm getting E.T. vibes. This is because the costume designers tried to balance out the mascot by making him somewhat realistic while also being a cartoon character. His eyes were also missing the white parts, and instead were fully brown with huge black pupils, and his mouth was open. That gave him a kind of shocked look sometimes. The trunk is interesting as it almost appears bendable, but it's not actually bendable. Instead, he's just lifting it up over his mask so it doesn't hang down and probably cause extra weight to the mask. His head was actually kind of a challenge to wear, which is expected since it was a new costume. Hugh Dye had to get his roommate to engineer some sort of coat hanger contraption to secure the head in place. The body is pretty basic, but at least he's a chonky elephant, unlike the last two. The chubbiness of the costume proved challenging at times. Since it was made out of a thick material and liner, it was pretty heavy and hard to move around in. He's actually got large elephant feet this time with nails and everything, not just regular shoes. His hands are kind of interesting because, as you know, elephants don't have fingers, so how would they translate that for a costume? Well, they didn't give him fingers. They gave him normal elephant feet. Although I have noticed that in a few photos, Big Al has hands, so it's possible this early costume had holes in the hands for whenever the performer's hands needed to be visible. And last but certainly not least, his red crimson jersey, which was apparently the hottest part of the original costume, due to it being heavy and made of wool. It's also sporting a white letter A on the front. Oh yeah, if you're wondering about the 1980 Sugar Bowl outcome, well, Alabama beat Arkansas 24-9, so I guess Big Al made a big difference. Not only was Hugh Dye the first person to play Big Al, but he was also the person who helped Big Al become one of the most popular mascots in all of sports. More specifically, the way he engaged and entertained everyone. He wanted to mainly establish having a relationship with all Bama fans, not just kids or adults, but everyone. Anybody can enjoy Big Al. Some things Dye thought of at the game are still being used by Big Al today, like crowd surfing in the student section, and creating hilarious skits with props. For example, this version of Big Al almost always rode around in this weird football cleat car thing. It kinda looks like a roller skate. He also rode around on a bike a few times. I should also go ahead and mention that Hugh Dye only played Big Al for the 1980 Sugar Bowl, as he graduated shortly thereafter. So for the 1980 football and basketball seasons, 2 students, Kent Howard and Maury Smith, took turns playing the role of Big Al. I'll talk more about the Big Al performers later in the video. This Big Al costume really didn't see any use outside of sporting events or campus activities. He made a few small appearances outside the university here and there, but not often. I couldn't find any events this guy was used at. I do know that he did have a few costume variants, such as wearing overalls and this very fancy tuxedo complete with a white top hat. This version of Big Al was also used when Bear Bryant celebrated his 300th win against the dreadful Kentucky Wildcats, as well as the 1981 Cotton Bowl. In late 1983, all good and slightly alien-looking things must come to an end as the original Big Al costume was retired, due to it falling in a state of disrepair. It was also deemed too hot and too uncomfortable. Shortly after that, the costume was put on display inside the Ferguson Student Center, now called the UA Student Center. It stayed there all the way until 2009, when it was moved to the Paul W. Bryant Museum, where it is apparently still there to this day, although it's not on display. Speaking of retirement, something else ended around 1983, and that was Alabama permanently stopped using live elephants for campus activities. This came to an end because in 1982, a 24-year-old man crawled into the elephant enclosure and was injured after one elephant threw him into another elephant. After that, the university decided it was too dangerous keeping the animals, so they were phased out. But with all that out of the way, the university could now put 100% of their mascot focus on Big Al, which started by getting a new costume.
Bama fans, 92 was the year the tide rolled over everyone. Now you can relive all the action and excitement of Alabama's bowl victory with this collector's edition video, the 1992 National Champ. It's free with your paid subscription to Sports Illustrated, the best way to get into the action for over 24 million readers. Call now to get your free video of the night Bama blew away the Hurricane. You'll also receive a season of bonus SEC coverage, starting with the college football preview issue. All season long, SI will bring you the intensity of the Southeastern Conference. It's extra SEC coverage at no extra cost. Get your bonus SEC coverage and your free video, along with a full year of Sports Illustrated for only $1.39 an issue. Save over 52% off the cover price. For quicker delivery, use your credit card. Nobody's into sports like Sports Illustrated. Get into it.
Okay, so this chapter isn't going to be long because there's barely anything on this next costume, but I still wanted to give it its own chapter since it's pretty unique. The next Big Al costume debuted in late 1983, and as you can see it looks quite different. The overall design of the costume looks less like a real elephant, and more like a cartoon character. The eyes are not as dark and creepy anymore, and he now has cheek vents that helps the performer stay cool in the suit. He still has an open mouth, but it's not as wide and his trunk is now exclusively pointing down. The ears are also different, as they now have a high and tight look. His body seems to be a lot fatter than the old one, but other than that, he still has the same hands, same feet, and red crimson jersey. Although I don't think this one will give you a heat stroke. His tail also has white hair on the tip instead of black hair. This Big Al pretty much did the exact same things the previous one did. Rode around on the sidelines on anything with wheels, entertaining the crowd, and messing with other mascots. He was also allowed on the field now that Bear Bryant retired. Actually, Bear Bryant passed away in 1983, so rest in peace. There were two notable events involving this costume that took place around the same time. The first was at the 1983 Sun Bowl where Alabama played SMU. A photo was taken of Big Al limping and being helped off the field by two helpers. The reason he was limping was because the performer had a past knee injury, and they just felt pain to the point of limping. The cold weather from that game also played into the injury, but don't worry, he was okay at the end. The other event was not as painful, but rather political. In 1984, Big Al got to share the stage with the President of the United States at the time, Ronald Reagan. That's right, the Ronald Reagan, came to the University of Alabama during his re-election campaign to give a speech. And after that speech, Big Al came on the stage and gave Reagan an Alabama football jacket, all while the crowd waved their American flags and held their Bama signs high. This makes Big Al one of the few college mascots to interact with a U.S. president. It's kind of funny since Big Al is an elephant and Ronald Reagan is a Republican whose symbol is an elephant. What a coincidence! Despite injuring himself and meeting a U.S. president, this Big Al costume was retired in 1985. The reason for his retirement is still unknown. It's also unknown where this costume is today. But now we move on to the next costume, and this one you have definitely seen.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide, y'all. Roll Tide, Margaret.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Get sauce. Roll Tide. Roll Tide.
It's such an honor. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide?
Yep.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, Roll Tide. Woo!
Hi, Marion Daisy. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
He will always be remembered. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
In 1986, the university decided to go with a new direction with Big Al. That decision resulted in a brand new costume that threw anything realistic out the window and went full cartoon mode. This Big Al is very different from any past Alabama mascot, due to how simple the whole costume looks. Speaking of the costume, let's go over it. Starting with the head, again it looks very much like a cartoon character and less like a real elephant. The ears are a lot larger now, and they don't have any detail. The eyes are also a lot larger and his blue eye color became more noticeable. His trunk is a little bit thicker, and it actually has lines on it. He once again has cheek vents to keep the performer cool, but honestly the first time I saw them I thought they were tusks. I mean, come on, don't they look like tusks? The body also changed quite a bit. He's still fat, but now it's a lot baggier and lighter, so the performer can move around much better, and can do things the other Big Als couldn't do. The feet are now flat, which also helps the performer out, since they can now walk a lot better. The hands are interesting because there's no longer a hole for the hands of the performer to stick out of, but instead that was replaced with gloves that look like elephant feet, but they are flexible enough for the performer to hold things better without their bare human hands showing. It's kinda hard to explain. And finally, he now has tan nails on his feet and hands. It appears that in this photo, Big Al's crimson jersey was reduced to a large red t-shirt with no letter A in sight. However, later on he did get a new crimson jersey that actually had the letter A on the front, but also his name and the number 0 on the back. Sometimes it's the number 1. This Big Al costume might look familiar to you, as it's actually the first version of the current Big Al costume used today. It was also created by the well-known mascot company Olympus Group, who still makes the Big Al suits to this day. They've also created some other famous college mascots like Bucky the Badger from the University of Wisconsin, Sparky from Arizona State University, and of course Louie the Cardinal Bird from the University of Louisville. If you want to learn about Louie's history, check out the history video link in the description. Going back to Big Al, here's a fun fact. The head of the costume is actually made of a lightweight plastic instead of foam or fiberglass. All Olympus mascots have this, and it helps to give the mascot suits more durability. Some more fun facts about this costume is that the head weighs about 20 pounds, and that includes the weight of the trunk, ears, and fabric covering the head. The temperature inside the costume can get about 30 to 40 degrees hotter than the outside temperature. For example, if it's 60 degrees for you, it's about 90 to 100 degrees for the person in the suit. Yeah, that's hot. And don't get me started on when it's 98 degrees outside. Since this new Big Al costume was a lot easier to move in, he started doing more things the other ones couldn't do, or if they could, he could do it better. He started running out with the football team onto the field at the beginning of the game, did more crazy and funny skits, and this is also when Big Al started doing his now iconic belly shake, which he still does to this day. He also started to get more costume variants like this pirate costume. I think that's what it is. And this outfit he wore during the 1995 SEC tournament against Tennessee. I'm not sure what it is, but it might be either a St. Patrick's Day outfit since this was in March, or it's a Mardi Gras outfit since the game was in New Orleans. I'm not sure, you decide. This version of the modern Big Al would be used for a good 10 years, making several special appearances throughout. I will now talk about some of the events he attended as well as other things regarding this Big Al. For example, in a 1989 football game against Memphis, Big Al caused the team to get a penalty because he was standing in midfield during the coin toss at the beginning of the game, which violated NCAA rules. Something more positive was this Big Al costume was used when Alabama won their 12th national championship in 1992. Their first football national championship title in 13 years. Also in 1992, history was made when a student named Lena Thomas Austin became the first woman to play Big Al. Up until this point, Big Al had been played exclusively by men. She led the way for other women to play the elephant, which continues even today. Lena played Big Al from 1992 to 1994. Oh, I forgot to mention that in 1990, Alabama temporarily brought back live elephants, as a pair of them were on the campus prior to the 1991 homecoming game against Tulane. And hey look, Big Al got to meet them. By 1996, the costume was starting to show its age, and so the university decided to give Big Al a soft redesign and retire this version. They kept the same overall design for the next costume, they just changed things up a little bit. Meanwhile, this costume was sent to the Paul W. Bryant Museum and put on display for everyone to see. And he's still there to this day if you want to see him.
Alabama so Georgia could win. And listen, it gets so bad, my 7-year-old grandson, Max, said the same thing. Oh, okay, Max, come on, here you go. Roll Tide. Give me that elf for the
Hey, Corso getting a reaction from
there you go,
Alabama
Max.
fans close in the set. Max is happy. Coach Corso picking Alabama, so we have 2 picks for Alabama, 1 for Georgia here. We'll see what happens.
In late 1996 or 1997, Big Al received a minor makeover. The overall design was exactly the same, but this time the fabric color was changed from a light gray color to a dark gray color. But his nails were still tan, he still had black under the eyes, and his crimson jersey received a few small changes, like the inclusion of a line on the bottom of the jersey and different font for the letter A. Aside from his fabric color, the biggest difference with this costume is the hands, as they now have a weird turquoise color. I don't know why they did this, it doesn't look right, they should have just kept the light gray color. His design was not the only thing changed, as Big Al was once again able to do more things that some of the others didn't do, but not much. The university really started to work on and focus more on what Big Al was like, and what kind of entertainment he would bring. For example, they gave him personality traits. He is a happy-go-lucky, fun-loving mascot who never carries a chip on his shoulder. His skits and sideline gags also changed for the better, as Big Al was given greater cardboard props and more funny outfits. So many, in fact, that I'm dedicating a whole chapter to them at the end of the video. Big Al was also attending more mascot and cheerleading nationals. Not as many as Albie the Tiger, but still a few. A noteworthy appearance was at the 2010 varsity cheerleading competition. And let's just say he put on a very interesting performance. Big Al was also becoming more available for private events and parties. He started showing up at weddings and birthday parties, and even at Alabama fan events, but only if it wasn't during a game. I mean, you can't have 2 Big Als running around at the same time. As we entered the new millennium, aka the 2000s, a couple of changes occurred regarding Alabama's mascot. First, the university updated their logo to look a little more modern, although they just took an alternative logo and made it the primary logo. They actually do still use this logo, but it's now a secondary logo / alternative logo to their current logo from the early 2000s. The other thing that changed were some of Big Al's features. His nails on his feet and hands were changed from tan to white, and his cheek vents started to appear more white, so now they really look like tusks. His jersey received changes to include the new Alabama A logo. The biggest change to the costume was his trunk, as it's no longer thick and bulky, but now it's floppy, and has little to no stuffing on the inside. I'm assuming this change was done because the previous trunk added a lot of weight to the head, so it was changed to add more comfort to the performer. And so from this point on, I'm not going to talk about Big Al's costume evolution anymore, because he really hasn't changed at all, aside from a few eye changes. So consider this the end of Big Al's costume evolution, but we still have a lot of things to talk about. Here's something I haven't mentioned to you guys yet. Did you know that Big Al has a girlfriend? Or had, because I'm not sure if she's still used by the university. Her name is Big Alice, and I will say, I kind of understand why she isn't used much. I mean, she's literally just Big Al dressed in drag. The only difference is her dress, and that her nails are pink instead of white. Then they just slapped a bow on a spare Big Al head, and voila, Big Alice. She was created simply because the university wanted to give Big Al a love interest. But personally, I don't think Big Al needs a love interest. He's fine on his own. But then again, in this world of diversity and inclusion, maybe Big Alice is more important than we ever thought. So now I will mention some of the larger events and appearances this current Big Al was a part of. And what better event to talk about than the one that Alabama wants you to forget? So in the 2000s, mascot fights were becoming a popular thing to see. I mean, who wouldn't want to see two guys fight in oversized costumes? Well, one of the earliest mascot fights occurred at a football game between Alabama and Southern Mississippi in 2002. You see, the two schools had planned a scripted fight between Big Al and Southern Mississippi's mascot Seymour the Eagle. The fight would start in the visitors section where Big Al would lose the fight, but then they would go to the Alabama student section where Big Al would completely dominate over Seymour. Now there's conflicting reports on what exactly went down, but thankfully the whole incident was caught on video, so it'll be a little easier to understand what happened. So in the video we see Seymour beat up Big Al at first, but then later on we see Big Al destroy Seymour. Both times the crowd is cheering and chanting, and then at the end they part ways. Now one report says that the student dressed as Seymour got carried away and turned the staged fight into a real fight, while another report says Big Al was the one who took things too far. I even heard one report saying Big Al actually made Seymour's head fall off, but none of that was captured in the video, so either those things never happened, or they happened after the video was shot. I wasn't there, heck, I wasn't even born yet, so I'm not sure which one is true. Whatever happened that day led to a big change for Big Al, one that I've got some opinions on. So after this incident, the University of Alabama decided to make a new rule that states Big Al is no longer allowed to interact with other teams' mascots on the field. Now while the rumors of who took the fight too far changed, there's another claim that might actually be the answer to why this rule was created. That claim is the fight distracted the crowd from the game. However, I'm calling this rule complete bullcrap, and very unnecessary. I feel like Big Al is being unfairly unpunished. At least if he's the victim. If Seymour was the one who took things too far, then he should have been punished, not Big Al. But if it was Big Al who took things too far, then maybe this is a fair punishment. I mean, Big Al is no stranger to fights. For example, he got into a fight with Tennessee's mascot in 1998, but still. Also, if the fight was distracting from the game, wouldn't that be fine? I mean, a mascot's main job is to entertain, and in the video you can see the two mascots entertaining the crowd. So why punish the mascots for doing their jobs? And what about the people who were there who didn't like football? This helped provide entertainment to them. and a good laugh. Remember, smartphones weren't a thing back then. I should also mention that in the video you never see the two mascots actually fighting. They're obviously play fighting and not actually trying to hurt each other. Not to mention no one intervened or tried to break up the fight. In fact, they helped. Again, I wasn't there, so I'm not sure what happened after the video, but maybe someone who was at the game who witnessed the fight can help me out. I don't know, what do you guys think? Was this punishment fair? Should Big Al be allowed to interact with other teams' mascots? I certainly think they should lift the ban and let Big Al have some fun messing with other teams' mascots. Despite being banned from interacting with mascots from other teams, Big Al has accidentally broken this rule a few times. But sometimes it's not his fault, like how on numerous occasions Big Al was attacked by the University of Hawaii's mascot. There is also a catch to this rule. It only says Big Al can't interact with other mascots on the field. So this means Big Al can interact with other mascots off the field, sometimes. For example, if there's a promotional event going on like a festival or photo shoot, Big Al can interact with the other mascot. There's also a few other examples, but I'll save those for later. One thing that is important to a mascot is merchandise. Sports teams create merchandise based on their mascots all the time, and Alabama was no different. Now, I'm not sure if any merchandise of the original Big Al exists, but usually older Bama merch is just a generic elephant. But it really took off with this Big Al. There were plush dolls, statues, several types of inflatables, and even this weird Lego-type figure, as well as this Lego-type bust. Not to mention, Big Al is one of the few mascots to get his very own Funko Pop. And there's also this costume head mask, so you can literally be Big Al. I actually own a piece of Big Al merchandise. It's a nutcracker, and I got it from an LTD magazine. I also own an Obby nutcracker, but that's not important right now. Big Al also made a few video game appearances, the most famous of which is in NCAA Football 13 and NCAA Football 14, where you can have a team of mascots in the mascot mashup mode. So for Alabama, you could have a team of elephants go against another team's mascot. Speaking of other teams' mascots, Big Al was just recently made into a tire sculpture, along with the Cincinnati Bearcat, to promote the Cotton Bowl. There are also several children's books based on or centered around Big Al, or primarily featured him. And while on the subject of books, Big Al is actually part of Marvel. Okay, that was a joke, but hear me out. So during the college football playoffs, ESPN commissions Marvel Comics to design a poster promoting the games. These posters are usually parodies of already existing Marvel Comics covers, but with whoever the college's mascots are replacing the superheroes. Big Al has been a part of many of these, mostly because Alabama is almost always in the playoffs, but there's one specific cover I want to talk about. So for the 2018 playoffs, Marvel created a cover that parodied the Iron Man comic book 66 cover from 1974, but instead of Iron Man and Thor, it shows Big Al fighting my hometown mascot, Louie the Cardinal Bird from Louisville. Now here's the real question. Who would actually win in a fight, Big Al or Louie? Well, even though I'm a Louisville fan, I'm going to have to say Big Al wins. He's got a size advantage, and if you look at the outcome of the game, I've proved my point even further. Sorry, Louie. This current version of Big Al has also been used for other major events. These events were usually a lot bigger than just a regular old appearance. Some notable events include all of the national championships Alabama attended and the years that they won, which were 2009, 2011, 2012, 2015, 2017, and most recently, 2020. In 2010, Big Al participated in the 40-yard dash on the Rick and Bubba show. His time was 5.3 seconds, which is even faster than Obby, who completed the run in 5.5 seconds. Not bad considering the first time he tried he slipped and fell, and then started throwing out food to people. Big Al also made several appearances in different ESPN or college-related commercials, often with other mascots. One of the larger appearances he made was in a music video for the Brad Paisley song Country Nation, where you got to see his football skills. That also led to Big Al and other college mascots appearing at the Country Music Awards, also in 2015. Lastly, due to the internet rising in popularity and websites like Facebook and YouTube were created, the university has been doing several promotional videos with Big Al. Most of these are for promoting a major sports event, but others are for holidays or any other campus activities. One last thing to mention regarding Big Al's history, and it all centers around one man, Lee Corso. For those of you who don't know this man, Lee Corso is one of the hosts of College Game Day Picks, where he along with a few others make educated guesses on which teams playing that day would win. Well, at the end of the show, when all the hosts choose their final picks, Corso always puts on the mascot head for whatever team he chooses. And let's just say he might be partial to Big Al. Now, Lee Corso has worn Alabama headgear before, but it appears he didn't wear the Big Al head until around 2008, and maybe a little bit before that. Corso has wore the Big Al headgear more times than any other mascot head, and he's even gone on record saying that Big Al's head is his second favorite mascot head to wear, his first being the Oregon Duck. He's also done some pretty interesting things with the Big Al head, like when he picked Alabama to win while standing on a giant elephant statue. Another time was when Katy Perry was a guest picker in 2014. She picked Ole Miss to win, but Corso picked Alabama and he put on Big Al's head. Well, Katy took offense to this, and she took off Big Al's head and threw it almost into a crowd behind them. Now don't worry, no mascot heads were harmed during the broadcast. While we're on the subject of Big Al's head on different bodies, that's a good way to segment into the next chapter. So for over the last 25 years, this Big Al has worn a large amount of costumes and disguises for games and events. Now it is impossible to go over every single outfit Big Al has worn, as it's not documented that well, and there's also some outfits that don't have any information on them. So for the purpose of this video, I'll just go over the ones I could find while researching. Note, I'm not going to bring up alternative jerseys, since he wears those a lot. So I'm not going to consider those variant outfits. Also, try to keep up, he's got a lot. So first up are some alternative outfits I found in photos such as this one where he's wearing underpants for some reason. This one where he's wearing these kind of shorts. And then for Christmas, he gets this very snazzy Santa Claus outfit. I also read somewhere that at a game in Memphis, Big Al dressed up as Elvis, but I couldn't find any photos of that. Around Halloween, he'll get this actually pretty cool ghost outfit. Sometimes he might try to go trick-or-treating, too. Here he is in a 2012 highlight video wearing an undercover suit complete with a tie and jacket. Here he is in a magician outfit. Here's a Superman outfit. Here's a doctor's outfit. Here's a fencing outfit. Here's another tuxedo. Here's a referee shirt he wears sometimes. Okay, now, what is this? Here's some interesting outfits from the 2013-2014 season. Here he is in a construction outfit giving away peanuts. What is this? Why is he saying, "Hey Jack"? Who's Jack? Anyway, here's a Hawaiian outfit. And lastly, here's a random dance outfit. Going into 2014 for some reason, he was often seen wearing these red elephant-sized Nike shoes. He only wore them in 2014. I wonder what the significance was. As for other outfits, here's a Greek god outfit. This outfit almost reminds me of Bear Bryant. For 2015, here's another Hawaiian outfit. Not sure if this counts, but he's wearing left shark fins. Here he is dressed in a cook's outfit helping out with popcorn. Oh god, he's a minion now. And lastly, here he is dressed as security. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Big Al was confined to standing areas and off the field. But he still got some cool face masks. It's kind of weird seeing mascots with face masks on because, well, you know. This last season, he dressed up as Where's Waldo, as well as dressing up as Popcorn and trolling the heck out of Lane Kifflin, and going viral. Some other outfits to mention are his marching band hat, this chef outfit, whatever this thing is, his red swimming trunks, or nothing. He's streaking. So this pretty much concludes all of the different variant outfits I was able to find on YouTube, and in photos. If I missed any, then please put them in the comments section. And if I make an update video, I will include them. So we're pretty much at the end of Big Al's history. But now let's say that this video got you interested in Alabama and Big Al. And now you want to become Big Al. How do you do it? Well, I have the answers.
Welcome back to Alabama Tonight. He is the face of the Crimson Tide. Nick Saban is 1A. Big Al is 2A, no doubt about that. What does it take, though, to be the mascot at Alabama?
This chapter is for anyone who plans on going to the University of Alabama for college and is interested in trying out to become Big Al. I'm going to help you out a little bit by explaining how everything goes down for a student to become Big Al. So for starters, the tryout process is kind of intense, but not too bad. It takes 3 days, and it is held every April during the week of A-Day, which is a spring game. People who play Big Al are usually around 5'9" to 6'2", although there was apparently at one point a Big Al who was 6'7". Big Al is typically played by 5 people, mostly because he's a busy guy, making over 500 appearances a year. 500! That's more than the governor of Alabama. Okay, so now the actual tryout. The first day is pretty simple. It consists mostly of an interview and then something called a clinic. That's where you learn how to emulate Big Al and do the walk, because Big Al has a very distinct walk. You also learn how to sign autographs as Big Al. Yes, Big Al signs autographs. The second day is more clinic, but this time you are judged on how you walk and how you interact during a band cheer. Then you perform a 1.5-minute skit that was either thought up on the spot or pre-planned. It's different for most people. The skit is then performed, and that's when people are cut. Finally, if you happen to make it to the final cut, you get to go to the A-Day game for the final tryout. Here you will get scored on how you interact with the public during a non-athletic event. Then during the game you will perform for about 10 to 15 minutes during the game. And following the spring game, that's when the mascot team members are chosen. If you pass all of these tests, then congratulations! You're now one of the lucky few who gets to play one of the most beloved mascots in sports. But now let's go over a typical game day as Big Al. So the first thing done is all 5 of Big Al's performers have a meeting to go over the game plan on what Big Al is going to do during the game, and who's doing it since all of them are participating. They then have to get all of the equipment and props over to the stadium. This occurs about 5 hours before the game. The first shift is referred to as quad, which is everything Big Al does before going into the stadium. Big Al Performer 1 will go get his cart. Yes, Big Al has a cart. It's called the Rammer Jammer. Al Performer 1 is then driven around the quad to interact with everyone who is tailgating. There's also the Elephant Stomp, which is a pep rally where the band performs. This occurs an hour before kickoff. After that is over, Big Al 1 is driven to the stadium, and that's where Big Al 2 gets ready to do the pregame. During pregame, Big Al marches the band out onto the field. Then Big Al goes and runs out with the football team. Once that's done, Big Al 2 will go back to the locker room, and Big Al 3 takes their place for the first quarter. Big Al 3 does the first quarter, then Big Al 4 does the second quarter. Then Big Al 2 comes back out and does whatever skit Big Al is doing for halftime. Once halftime is over, Big Al 3 comes out and goes into the seating, and does box visits. You will almost never see Big Al on the sidelines during the third quarter. And finally, during the fourth quarter, Big Al 4 comes out, but this time he's wearing a white jersey, which is part of some tradition. And depending on how many students are in the student section, the weather, or game results, this is where Big Al will crowd surf. Once the game is over, Big Al gets packed away and sent back to his home outside the stadium. And that's a day in the life of Big Al. Before I end this video, I want to quickly talk about some of Big Al's performers I found while researching some of the information. I mean, it's always best to credit the people behind something. Now, there's not too many here, just some. Alabama is very strict on character integrity. First, we have 2 students named Trey Dickey and William Webster, who both played Big Al in the late 2010s. And recently graduated. I wanted to bring them up because they did an interview with the website FanBuzz.com. and in that interview they both gave good details on being Big Al, like how no one is allowed to know who plays Big Al. Oops. Trey's favorite moment as Big Al was getting to visit sick kids at a children's hospital, and how it was one of the few times the kids smiled. The last person I want to mention is Justin Sullivan, who played Big Al for 5 years in the 2010s. He is actually the guy who played Big Al in several ESPN commercials and in that Brad Paisley music video I talked about earlier, as well as the Country Music Awards. Justin says that the calmer, quieter moments are the loudest memories. His favorite memory as Big Al was when a family friend requested Big Al to visit a kid who was losing his sight and wanted to see Big Al before he lost his vision. Now, this appearance wasn't wild and crazy like Big Al usually is, but instead the boy sat in his lap for an hour, and everyone, including Justin inside the costume, started crying. Hey, who left this bowl of onions here? And there you have it, the history of Big Al, the Alabama Crimson Tide elephant mascot. I do apologize for this video being really long. Big Al has an extremely large history, but I guess it makes sense for an elephant to have a large history. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below which version of Big Al or any of the Alabama mascots was your favorite. Also, let me know if there are any other college mascots you want me to make history videos on. Just don't say the Kentucky Wildcat, because I have forbidden myself to do that one. And if you do suggest the Kentucky Wildcat, then there will be a large herd of elephants stomping towards your house and destroying it. But any other mascot I will happily do. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time on the History of series. Bye-bye!
Who you rolling with? Who you rolling with? We rolling with the tide. We roll, reppin' crimson and white. Who you rolling with? We rolling with the tide. We roll, reppin' crimson and white. Yeah.
I'm back from vacation. Well, I hope all my YouTube friends will be okay with me delaying the Big Al video. What was that? What was that? Oh, Cha-Cha. How you doing, buddy? What do you mean me delaying the Big Al video is going to affect your video? No, your video's up next. Okay. Well, let's see what happened ever since I left. No. No! Florence, no! Corporate.